Why was the city so quiet? The heat pressed down like an invisible weight, flattening the streets into silence. Dust hovered in the air, fine, bitter, sharp enough to sting her throat. Every breath tasted of stone. Every step carried the sound of ghosts. She crouched low on the rooftop, boots braced against cracked concrete, the rifle across her lap heavy as a truth she hadn't yet spoken. Elena Reyes had been through cities like this before. Bombed-out apartments, cars left as hollow shells, windows black with soot, walls jagged as broken teeth, a place where war had carved itself into every shadow. And yet, there was something different here. She steadied her binoculars, scratched lenses catching the burn of late afternoon light. Her squad was restless behind her, 3 men who trusted her judgment more than they trusted their own heartbeat. But she didn't move. She didn't blink. Her eyes swept the horizon, methodical, careful, rooftop to rooftop, brick to shattered brick. That's when she saw it. At first her mind refused to accept it. Just a shadow, she told herself, a length of steel mistaken for debris. But then the light shifted, striking glass. A lens. A glint too precise to be an accident. Her stomach dropped. She knew that shape, that posture, the way it seemed less like a weapon and more like the city itself had grown an arm. A Barrett .50. Her pulse stuttered. For a heartbeat the city fell away, replaced by memory. Kandahar. A convoy ambushed under a moonless sky, the recoil of a weapon that shook the desert, the echo of thunder tearing hope from men before they even hit the ground. That rifle hadn't just fired bullets, it had ended chances. She had sworn she'd never see it again. And yet here it was, stretched across a nameless city rooftop, scope glinting, waiting. Her squad shifted uneasily, sensing the change in her breath, the tightening of her shoulders. They didn't know yet. They hadn't seen what she had seen. "Elena," Ramirez whispered, voice low, careful. "What is it?" She didn't answer. Not yet. Because answering meant admitting that the past wasn't finished with her, that ghosts still carried rifles. The logical part of her mind began calculating distance, wind, angles. The part trained by drills, by years of repetition, by 1,000 steady breaths behind a scope. But another part, the older, darker part, was already back there in the desert, hearing that gun, watching men disappear in a blink. She adjusted her focus. Through the binoculars, the silhouette came sharper. Whoever lay prone behind that rifle wasn't panicked. They weren't desperate. They were patient. Calm, deadly calm. And something in that patience made her chest tighten. Where did he get that Barrett? The question wasn't for her squad. It wasn't even for herself. It was for the ghosts. For the shadows of missions that had followed her home, that still scratched at the edges of her sleep. Weapons like that didn't just appear. They were signatures, calling cards, warnings. Her throat went dry. She tried to force the words out, to give her squad an order, to tell them what to do. But before she could, the world cracked. A thunderclap tore the silence apart, louder than any bomb, more final than any scream. The wall beside her face exploded into a spray of dust and stone. Shards stung her cheek, carving a thin line of blood she barely felt. She hit the rooftop flat, instinct pulling her body down before her brain caught up. The Barrett had spoken. The sound reverberated through the city, low and heavy like judgment. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it was trying to escape her chest. The city blurred. Her memory overlapped the present. The sound of men shouting in another time, another place. The sight of armored glass shattering as if it were paper. Her squad scattered. Ramirez cursed, firing wild bursts toward windows that held no target. Harris shouted, his optics scanning too fast, too frantic. Elena stayed flat, cheek pressed into gritty concrete, lungs dragging in shallow breaths. She knew better. You didn't find a Barrett by searching, it found you. Another shot roared. This one ripped through the lip of the parapet by her boots, spraying chips of stone across her legs. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay still. Every instinct screamed to move, to crawl, to run. But she knew movement was death. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, not entirely. It was memory shaking her bones. The rhythm of the rifle, the deliberate pace, not rushed, not panicked, patient, calculated. Her squad looked to her now. Even through the chaos, they looked to her, and in their eyes she saw something unbearable: trust. "Talk to us," Ramirez hissed. "Where is he?" She didn't answer. She couldn't, not yet, because in that moment she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The city fell into silence again, and somehow that silence was worse than the thunder. It pressed against her ears, against her chest. A silence that said the shooter was waiting, measuring, deciding. Elena closed her eyes for half a second, forcing her breath into rhythm. Training had kept her alive through 2 decades of war. Inhale, exhale, slow, steady. She reached for her rifle, the steel warm under her palms. She slid it into place, elbows grinding into rough concrete. Her vision narrowed, not to the chaos of her men, not to the rattle of distant gunfire, only to the horizon, to the waiting ghost. Her memory screamed at her. This was how it ended, always like this. But she pressed past it. She counted, 5 seconds, maybe more, the rhythm of the other sniper's patience. Her pulse synced to the count. Then, just for a flicker, she caught it, the faintest light on glass, almost lost in the sun. Her chest tightened, her fingers steadied. "Now," she whispered it, barely louder than her breath. Her rifle bucked against her shoulder. The shot cracked across the rooftops, an answer hurled back at the ghost. The recoil slammed into her bones like an old companion, both punishment and comfort. For a heartbeat the world froze, the dust hung suspended, the city held its breath. Did she hit? Her scope locked onto the far rooftop. For a moment nothing, no movement, no sound. Then the silhouette twitched, rigid, broken, the body slumped sideways. The Barrett slipped. It clattered against stone, tumbling into shadow. Behind her, Ramirez exhaled hard, the sound breaking the silence like a flood. "Jesus Christ, you got him." Relief and disbelief tangled in his voice. Harris muttered a prayer, half shaken, half grateful. But Elena didn't move. She kept her cheek against the stock, eyes locked on the empty ledge, afraid that if she blinked the ghost would stand again. Only when her finger eased off the trigger, stiff and aching, did she let herself breathe. The rooftop was quiet now, but it wasn't peace. It was something hollow, a silence that carried questions. Because that rifle, it didn't belong here. Not in this city, not in the hands of a nameless enemy. Someone had placed it here, someone with reach, someone with intent. She whispered it again, so soft her squad didn't hear. "Where did you get that, Barrett?" The question wasn't for the dead man. It wasn't for the team. It was for the shadow behind him. Whoever had made sure a weapon like that found its way into this war. She pulled herself up slowly, every joint aching. Her squad watched, waiting for orders. She gave none, not yet, because this wasn't over. The battle was finished, but the war, the real war, was waiting. And in her chest, Elena Reyes knew the truth she had been running from. Ghosts didn't die. They just found new rifles. Why did her hands still tremble? The shooter was down. The Barrett lay cold in the rubble. Her team had survived. By all accounts, the danger had passed. But Elena Reyes couldn't quiet the thundering inside her chest. Even when the horizon fell still, even when her men began to breathe again, her pulse refused to slow. She crouched on the rooftop, eyes fixed on the distant ledge where the rifle had vanished. For a moment, she considered moving, signaling her squad to regroup, setting a course off this cursed rooftop. But her body resisted, as if moving would betray something sacred, something broken. Ramirez approached slowly, his boots crunching against grit. "Elena," he whispered, voice still rough with adrenaline. "We're good. He's gone. You dropped him." "Gone." The word echoed in her skull, empty as the silence that followed the kill. She didn't feel like she had won. She felt like she had reopened a wound that never healed. Her cheek still burned where the stone had cut her, dust clung to sweat. Her rifle weighed heavy in her hands, heavier than it should. She lowered it finally and forced her lungs into a rhythm. Inhale. Exhale. Her squad needed her steady, not haunted, not broken. "Stay sharp," she said at last, her voice even, almost cold. "That rifle wasn't meant to be here. Someone put it here. That means there's more." Her words tightened the air again. Harris glanced at her, brows furrowed. "You saying there's a supply line, that somebody armed him?" She didn't answer, not directly, because the truth in her gut was darker. A Barrett .50 didn't just appear in a city like this. It wasn't scavenged from black markets like battered Kalashnikovs. It was delivered, placed with intent, which meant they weren't fighting just another gunman. They were fighting reach, money, power. She swallowed hard, forcing her gaze away from the ledge. Her squad needed direction, not riddles. But she couldn't shake the thought, if one Barrett was here, more could follow. They descended from the rooftop cautiously, boots slipping on debris, rifles sweeping the shadows. The streets below were worse than the skyline. Burned-out cars formed barricades at every intersection. Windows gaped like black eyes, hollow and watchful. The air smelled of rust, smoke, and something older, something left behind. Elena kept her rifle tight against her shoulder. Every corner reminded her of Kandahar. Every echo of boots against stone brought back the night she had sworn never to relive. She hadn't told her squad everything about that night. How could she? Some memories weren't meant for words. Back then, the Barrett's voice had been the first warning, a thunderclap splitting darkness. She remembered the way it had ripped through an armored convoy as if the steel were paper. She remembered the second shot, the one that had torn through her commander's window, shattering him in a spray of silence. She remembered the disbelief on his face, the way his eyes widened, as if the world had betrayed him. And she remembered freezing, just for a breath, just for the space between one heartbeat and the next. She hadn't pulled the trigger when she should have. She hadn't moved when her squad needed her to. That single hesitation had cost lives. It had cost her sleep for years. Now, walking these ruined streets, she could still hear the echoes. The Barrett was never just a weapon. It was a ghost, and ghosts never left you alone. "Clear left," Ramirez muttered, sweeping his rifle. Harris echoed, "Clear right." Elena nodded, her voice firm. "Keep moving, eyes high, rooftops first." She sounded steady. She looked steady, but inside her mind was unraveling. Every shadow seemed to carry weight. Every window seemed to hide a glint of glass. She imagined scopes everywhere, all of them aimed at her. She wanted to shake it off, to remind herself she was trained, disciplined, ready. But fear had its own logic and memory its own grip. They reached the skeleton of an apartment block, its walls gutted, stairwells exposed. Inside, they found the body. The sniper. He was younger than she expected, barely 30, maybe less. His face was smooth beneath the dust, his jaw slack. His hand still rested near the Barrett as if reluctant to let go. Her men hovered at the doorway, rifles trained, nerves raw, but Elena stepped closer. She crouched, studying him. Something was wrong. The gear wasn't scavenged. His uniform, though dust-stained, was intact, patched with precision. His boots weren't mismatched. His magazines were full, organized, disciplined. This wasn't some ragged fighter scraping by on chaos. This man had training, and he'd been supplied. She brushed grit from the rifle with the back of her glove. The serial number had been scratched out, deliberately. Her stomach knotted. Weapons with their numbers erased meant only one thing. Somebody didn't want them traced. Ramirez broke the silence. What the hell is he doing with a gun like this? Elena didn't answer. She couldn't. Not without revealing what she feared most, that the same shadows from Kandahar had followed her here, that maybe this wasn't coincidence at all. She stood slowly, jaw tight, eyes narrowing on the weapon. "Bag his gear," she ordered. "Take everything, no traces left behind." Her voice was cold, controlled, but inside a storm churned, because she knew this wasn't the end, this was the beginning. As they stripped the body, she turned away, staring through the broken window at the dying light. The sun hung low, painting the ruins in orange and shadow. For a moment the city looked almost peaceful. Almost, but she knew better. Peace was always a lie in places like this. The squad regrouped, packs heavier now with stolen magazines, scraps of intel, fragments of gear. Harris muttered something about moving out before nightfall. Ramirez agreed, his nerves still raw. But Elena lingered, her eyes locked on the horizon. Because somewhere out there, in the silence between heartbeats, the real enemy was watching. Whoever had placed that Barrett here wasn't finished. They had more, and they weren't afraid to use them. As they moved, she fell into silence, walking point through the rubble. She needed to keep her men alive. That was the mission. But her thoughts kept circling back to the same question, the one she couldn't escape. Where did you get that Barrett? And worse, who put it in your hands? The night would bring no answers, only shadows, but in her chest she carried the truth she didn't want to face. Some battles weren't fought against enemies you could see. Some battles were fought against memory, against ghosts, against yourself. She gripped her rifle tighter, eyes sharp, steps steady. Her squad would see strength. They would hear certainty in her voice. But inside, Elena Reyes was still in Kandahar, still hearing that thunder, still wondering if she would ever be free. Why did night always feel heavier in broken cities? The sun had bled out across the horizon, leaving the ruins in shades of ash and rust. Darkness slid over the shattered walls, turning every window into a black mouth. The silence deepened, carrying its own weight, pressing into lungs, into thoughts. Elena Reyes adjusted the strap of her rifle and scanned the street ahead. Her squad followed in a staggered line, boots crunching softly over rubble. Their silhouettes stretched thin under the faint glow of a half-moon, moving shadows among shadows. She hated nights like this. Daylight at least gave you clarity, angles, reflections, patterns of movement. At night, the city swallowed truth whole. A glint of glass could be moonlight or a sniper's eye. A whisper of wind could be silence breaking. Her squad trusted her to guide them through. That trust was heavier than her pack. Ramirez murmured behind her, voice barely audible. We should hold until first light. Moving now's a gamble. Elena didn't look back. If we stay, we're boxed in. Every rooftop, every window, they'll own us. Keep moving. Her tone was steady, even firm, but inside her chest tightened, because Ramirez wasn't wrong. They were vulnerable out here, crossing open streets like insects on glass. Every step felt like a dare to unseen eyes. She forced her breathing into rhythm. Inhale, exhale, stay steady. But memory had its own rhythm, and it was harder to silence. Kandahar again, the night that never left her. The convoy rolling slow through narrow streets, engines growling like beasts too big for the cages around them. She remembered the crack of the first Barrett round, the way the lead truck jerked, fire erupting like a second sun. She had been younger then, too young maybe. Her hands had steadied on her rifle, her scope lined on the glint of glass. She had seen him, the shooter. She could have taken the shot. But she hesitated, just long enough for another round to tear through her commander's vehicle, just long enough to hear the scream that cut off too soon. She'd carried that silence ever since. Now, with every shadowed rooftop above her, she wondered, would tonight be the same? Would hesitation cost her squad everything? A dog barked in the distance, sharp, sudden. The squad froze, rifles sweeping arcs into the dark. Elena held up a hand, signaling stillness. Her heart pounded, counting beats in her ears. The bark stopped. Silence reclaimed the street. She lowered her hand, and they moved again. The apartment block they entered was hollow, walls stripped to concrete bones. Moonlight leaked through shattered windows. Glass crunched under their boots. Every sound seemed louder at night, amplified by emptiness. They moved floor by floor, clearing rooms, rifles raised. Harris whispered, "Clear." Ramirez echoed. Their voices trembled though they tried to hide it. Elena moved last, sweeping corners, her senses stretched thin. She couldn't shake the feeling they weren't alone. On the third floor they found a vantage point, a wide window overlooking the street. The squad settled in, laying out gear, securing sectors. Ramirez pulled off his helmet, wiping sweat with a trembling hand. Harris set down his pack, shoulders sagging with exhaustion. But Elena stayed at the window. Her rifle rested across the sill, eyes fixed on the horizon. She couldn't stop searching, couldn't stop waiting for that glint of glass. Her squad needed rest, but she couldn't let go. Not after today, not after the Barrett. "Raise," Ramirez said softly, using her last name the way soldiers did when they wanted to ground someone. "We're not machines. We need to breathe. Take a minute." She nodded, but her eyes never left the skyline. The silence stretched. Then Harris broke it. "You ever seen one of those up close before? A Barrett?" Elena stiffened. The question landed heavy. She thought of Kandahar, of the cratered vehicles, of the faces she still saw when she closed her eyes. "Yes," she said finally, her voice flat. "Once." Ramirez glanced at her, curious, but something in her tone warned him not to ask more. The silence returned, thick and restless. She wished she could tell them, about the ghosts, about the guilt that had lived in her bones since that night, but words wouldn't change it. Words wouldn't bring the dead back. She stayed at the window until her eyes ached. Every shift of moonlight looked like a rifle's shadow. Every flicker in the distance felt like a threat. When exhaustion finally forced her down, she sat against the wall, rifle across her knees. Her squad drifted into restless half-sleep, one by one. But Elena stayed awake, ears tuned to the silence, heart tuned to memory. Because silence was never safe. Silence was just the pause before the next shot. Hours dragged. The city outside didn't move. No engines, no footsteps, just the occasional rattle of steel in the wind. And yet she couldn't shake the feeling. They were being watched. Her fingers brushed the cut on her cheek, dried blood rough against her skin, a reminder of how close death had come. She closed her eyes just for a breath, just for one fragile moment. And in that moment, she heard it again. Not outside, inside. The Barrett's thunder. She jolted, eyes snapping open, pulse racing. Her squad stirred, startled, glancing her way. "You good?" Ramirez asked, voice low, wary. She forced a nod. "Yeah." But she was. Because in the space between waking and memory, she'd realized something that made her blood run colder than the night air. The sniper she killed today, he hadn't been hunting randomly. His position, his patience, the way he'd sighted in. He'd been waiting for her. Not for any soldier, not for any patrol, for her. The thought coiled tight in her chest, unbearable. Why her? Why place a Barrett here in her path aimed at her? Unless someone knew about Kandahar. Unless someone wanted her to hear that thunder again. She pressed her palms against the concrete floor, steadying herself. She couldn't share that suspicion with her squad. Not yet. They wouldn't understand. Or worse, they would believe her. And then the weight of it would crush them too. So she kept it inside, a secret burning against her ribs. She stood, packing the room, scanning the skyline again, searching for another glint, another shadow. The city looked calm, dead calm. But she knew better. Peace was just a trick of the dark. The war was still watching. And somewhere beyond these ruins, someone had decided that ghosts weren't finished with Elena Reyes. What did it mean when silence felt like a trap? The city hadn't moved in hours. No footsteps, no engines, not even the echo of distant gunfire. Only the occasional rattle of sheet metal in the wind, sharp enough to make the squad's nerves jump every time. Elena Reyes stayed at the window, eyes locked on the skyline. Her squad sat behind her in uneasy stillness. Harris fiddled with the strap on his rifle, tightening it, loosening it, over and over. Ramirez had his head tipped back against the wall, eyes closed, but she could tell from the tension in his jaw he wasn't asleep. No one spoke. The silence was too heavy for words. Elena adjusted her rifle on the sill, eyes scanning. Nothing, just darkness and broken outlines of rooftops, but the absence itself screamed at her. She thought of Kandahar again. She didn't want to. The memories came anyway, rushing in like they always did when the quiet stretched too long. The convoy had been moving slow, too slow. She'd been in the second vehicle, scope raised, searching rooftops just like this. And then thunder. The Barrett's first shot ripping through the night, turning steel into fire. She'd found the glint, the shooter. Her finger had curled against the trigger. But she froze. Her commander's voice had cut in over the radio, calm but firm. Raise, take the shot. She hadn't. Not until it was too late. Not until another round shattered the glass and ended his voice forever. That silence afterward, she still carried it. Elena, Ramirez's voice snapped her back. You've been staring out that window for hours. We need a plan. Sitting here's not gonna cut it. She turned. His eyes were sharp, restless. Harris looked at her too, waiting. She forced her voice steady. At first light, we move. We need to link up with command, report the Barrett. This isn't random. Ramirez frowned. You think one sniper changes the mission? One Barrett changes everything, she said flatly. Her tone ended the discussion, but the look Ramirez gave her lingered. He wanted answers. She wasn't ready to give them. The night dragged, minutes stretching into hours. When dawn finally bled into the sky, pale and thin, the squad moved out. Streets lay in hushed ruin, shadows retreating reluctantly. Elena walked point, scanning rooftops with every step. Her muscles ached from tension, but she kept her pace even. They moved through alleys, keeping close to walls, avoiding open streets where the sky could watch them. Half a mile in, Harris froze. Wait, look. Elena followed his gaze. Across the street, a building leaned half-collapsed, its walls torn open. Inside, glinting faintly in the dust-filtered light, sat crates, military crates. Her chest tightened. They crossed carefully, rifles raised. Ramirez pried open the nearest crate with his knife. The lid creaked. Inside, ammunition. Not local stock, fresh, sealed. U.S. markings scratched out but still faintly visible. Elena's stomach dropped. Harris opened another. Spare parts, scope mounts, cleaning kits, all standard issue, all deliberate. This wasn't scavenge, Ramirez said, voice low. This was a drop. Elena's mind raced. Someone had supplied the sniper, someone with access, someone who didn't care about being traced. She crouched, running her glove over the stenciled ghost of letters scratched from the crate. The symbols were familiar, too familiar. Kandahar again. She remembered crates just like these being unloaded in the desert, pallets dropped by cargo planes under starlight. Only this time they weren't for her unit. They were for someone else. Her throat tightened. The silence in the room grew unbearable. Harris shifted, voice cracking with unease. What does this mean? We're not just chasing some lone gunman, are we? Elena didn't answer. She couldn't, because the truth clawing at her chest was one she didn't want to voice. What if the ghosts of Kandahar weren't just memories? What if they'd followed her here? Ramirez's eyes locked on hers. You know something, say it. Her jaw tightened. She looked away, scanning the room, refusing to meet his gaze. All it means is someone wanted that Barrett here, which means more are coming. We don't stay, we move. She could feel Ramirez's suspicion burning into her back as they left the building. But she didn't waver. If she admitted the truth, if she told them that she had heard this thunder before, that she had frozen when lives depended on her, what would they see when they looked at her? A leader or a liability? They pushed through another stretch of broken street. Sunlight crept higher, burning off the mist, but Elena's chest stayed heavy. Every step forward felt like a step deeper into the same nightmare. At the next corner, Harris raised a fist, halting them. His scope swept the rooftops. Movement, 10 o'clock. Elena snapped her rifle up, scanning. A flicker of shadow against brick, too quick to mark. Her pulse jumped. Contact, Ramirez hissed. She steadied her scope, searching, breath slow. Nothing, just empty windows, silent rooftops. Maybe it was a trick of light, or maybe the silence had teeth again. Her finger hovered on the trigger. She wanted to fire, to end the doubt. But hesitation, that cursed hesitation, chained her finger. Clear, she muttered finally, though her gut twisted at the word. They moved on, but the unease thickened. The rooftops loomed taller, the silence pressed harder. And in her chest, Elena knew something she hadn't told them. The sniper they'd killed yesterday hadn't been alone. The Barrett was a message. And messages were never sent without someone waiting to hear the reply. How long could you walk before you admitted you were being followed? The morning dragged them forward through broken streets, every step loud against silence. Elena Reyes kept her rifle raised, eyes cutting between rooftops and alleyways, but the feeling only grew heavier. Something unseen moved with them. Her squad felt it too. Harris scanned too quickly, his scope darting like a trapped bird. Ramirez muttered curses under his breath, his jaw tight, his knuckles white against his rifle grip. No one said the word, hunted, but it hung in the air, unspoken, undeniable. At the corner of a gutted plaza, Elena halted, holding up a fist. Her men froze, rifles sweeping arcs. The plaza lay open, stripped bare. Too bare. A wide stretch of broken pavement, ringed by buildings with shattered windows yawning black. A killing ground. Her chest tightened. Kandahar again. The convoy rolling into a narrow street, too quiet, too empty. She had known then, known something was wrong, but she hadn't spoken until it was too late. Elena, Ramirez whispered, his voice cutting through memory. What's the call? Her eyes swept the rooftops. Too many angles, too many places to die from. We don't cross, she said firmly. Not here. Ramirez frowned. You want to backtrack? No, she said, already searching for another path. We circle, stay tight. They slipped into a side alley, walls closing in around them. The air was damp, heavy with mildew. Trash and broken plaster crunched under their boots. Elena's eyes kept flicking up, always up to the edges of roofs above. Halfway through the alley, a sound froze her. Metal, a faint scrape. She raised her rifle instantly, pulse spiking. Ramirez mirrored her, eyes darting. Harris hissed a curse. But the alley was empty. Her finger rested against the trigger, trembling with the urge to fire, to erase doubt before it became death. But her training anchored her finger, chained it. Nothing, Harris muttered, though his voice shook. Elena didn't lower her rifle, because nothing was never nothing. When they cleared the alley, they moved faster, nerves stretched thin. The city seemed alive now, every window watching, every corner waiting. They reached another building and slipped inside, closing the door behind them. The air smelled stale, thick with dust. Sunlight cut through cracks in the boarded windows, slanting across bare concrete floors. The squad dropped their packs, shoulders sagging. Harris wiped sweat from his brow. Ramirez paced like a caged animal. Finally, Ramirez snapped. All right, enough. We're not just walking blind anymore. Someone on us, you feel it, I feel it. Hell, Harris feels it. So what the hell aren't you telling us? Elena stiffened. His eyes locked on her, sharp, demanding. You knew about that Barrett. You called it before you even saw the body. How? Harris shifted uncomfortably, looking between them. The tension in the room tightened like a noose. Elena forced her jaw still, her breath steady. She wanted to lie, to bury Kandahar where it belonged. But her men's eyes, the trust, the suspicion, the fear, demanded more than silence. So she gave them part of it, not all, just enough. I've seen one before, she said quietly. Years ago, Kandahar. A sniper with a Barrett took out half a convoy before we could even respond. Ramirez's frown deepened. And you think this is the same crew? Her throat tightened. She thought more than that. She thought this was no coincidence, but she didn't say it. All I know, she said evenly, is someone put that rifle here, and whoever they are, they're watching us now. The room fell silent. Harris muttered shit under his breath. Ramirez rubbed his temples, packing harder. Finally he stopped, glaring at her. You're not telling us everything. Her chest clenched because he was right. She hadn't told them about freezing, about the commander she'd lost, about the silence she carried like a wound. And she couldn't, not now, not when they needed her steady. So she met his glare and held it. You don't need everything, you just need to trust me. The silence stretched sharp. Finally Ramirez looked away, muttering something she couldn't catch. Harris busied himself checking gear, avoiding eye contact. The trust in the room was cracking, and cracks in trust killed faster than bullets. Elena sat against the wall, her rifle across her knees. She forced her hands steady, but inside her pulse thundered. Because she couldn't escape the thought clawing at her. What if history was about to repeat itself? What if the ghosts from Kandahar weren't just memories, but hunters who had found her again? The building groaned in the wind, walls settling with hollow pops. The squad fell into uneasy quiet, each man lost in his own dread. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, just a breath. And in the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw it again. The glint of glass, the thunder of the Barrett, the split second where her finger froze, the trigger untouched. And her commander's eyes, wide, disbelieving, then gone. Her breath caught. She opened her eyes fast, forcing the memory back down. But the guilt didn't leave. It never left. She tightened her grip on the rifle, jaw set. This time, she told herself, this time I won't freeze. Outside, the silence pressed closer, a silence too perfect, too expectant. Elena's gut twisted with certainty. They weren't just being followed. They were being hunted. And whoever had sent the Barrett into this city wasn't done yet. What if the quiet wasn't empty at all? What if it was listening? The building felt wrong the moment they stepped into it. The walls leaned inward, cracked like ribs, and the air was too still, too heavy, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Dust clung to the shafts of light breaking through broken boards, and every creak of their boots echoed louder than it should. Elena raised her fist, signaling halt. Her squad froze. The silence pressed harder. Her gut churned, not from fear, from recognition. She had walked into places like this before in Kandahar, where silence was never silence, only bait. She scanned the corners, her scope sweeping slow arcs. Nothing, no movement, but her instincts screamed. The kind of scream honed from years of living just long enough to regret hesitation. Ramirez leaned close, whispering, "What is it?" "Too clean," she murmured, "too quiet." Harris frowned. "It's rubble, everything's quiet." Elena shook her head, eyes narrowing. "No rats, no dogs, no sound at all." Her words hung heavy. They all felt it then, the wrongness, the absence. They moved anyway, slow and cautious, clearing rooms one by one. The emptiness was suffocating. Each door opened to nothing, each stairwell led only to shadow, and still the silence stalked them. On the fourth floor, Ramirez froze mid-step. His boot hovered over a patch of dust. "Elena," he whispered sharply. She moved closer, eyes dropping to the floor. The dust was disturbed, not by rats, not by wind, by boots, fresh. Her chest tightened. Someone had been here, recently. She crouched, tracing the imprint with her glove. The tread was military, not local. Her stomach dropped. Harris's voice cracked. "They're watching us, aren't they?" Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was written in the dust at her feet. She stood, motioning silently for weapons ready. Every nerve screamed at her to move fast, to get out, but she forced herself steady. Panic killed quicker than bullets. They reached the rooftop. The view stretched across the ruined city, rooftops jagged like broken teeth, alleys winding like veins. Too many lines of sight, too many places to die from. Ramirez muttered, "This is bad ground." He wasn't wrong. Elena crouched at the parapet, scope raised, eyes cutting across the skyline. For a moment the city looked still, almost peaceful in the morning light. Then she saw it. Not a person, not movement, something worse. A reflection. Distant, faint, almost lost in the haze, but unmistakable, the glint of glass. Her breath caught. The Barrett. Not the same one, another. Her finger tightened on the trigger instinctively, but she froze. The glint disappeared, vanished into shadow. Her heart hammered. She whispered, "They're here." Ramirez swore under his breath, pulling back from the parapet. Harris pressed himself flat to the rooftop, panic flashing in his eyes. Elena forced herself to breathe, slow, steady. Her mind screamed Kandahar, screamed memory, screamed don't freeze again. But the silence stretched long and merciless. No shot came, no thunder, only waiting. And that was worse. Because patience was the true weapon. Ramirez hissed, "We can't sit here, we move now." But Elena shook her head, her eyes still locked on the horizon. They're watching for movement, that's what they want. Her men looked at her, fear raw in their faces, trust cracking. Harris whispered, "Then what do we do, just wait to die?" Elena swallowed hard. She could feel their doubt gnawing at her. She wanted to tell them she had the answer, that she was certain, that she wouldn't let Kandahar repeat itself. But the truth pressed against her ribs, sharp as glass. She wasn't sure. She had never been sure. She closed her eyes for a breath, forcing herself back into rhythm. Inhale, exhale, training, instinct, discipline. When she opened them, her voice was steady. "We don't run, we don't freeze, we fight smart." Ramirez's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Harris followed, though doubt still flickered in his eyes. They shifted position, staying low, rifles scanning arcs. Minutes dragged like hours. The city refused to move. And then a sound. Not thunder, not the Barrett. Closer. A soft scrape, boots against concrete. Her blood ran cold. They weren't just being watched. They were being surrounded. "Elena," Ramirez whispered, his voice tight, "we've got company." She steadied her rifle, her heart pounding against bone. Kandahar roared in her head, the glint of glass, the thunder, the silence after, the hesitation. "Not this time." Her finger settled on the trigger, her voice low, fierce. Eyes sharp. No hesitation. If they want us, they'll have to bleed for it. The silence answered back, heavy, waiting. And in that silence, Elena Reyes knew the truth. The ghosts hadn't just followed her. They were here, alive, hunting. And they weren't done. How long could silence hold before it cracked? The city answered for her. The first shot came sudden, brutal. Not the deep thunder of a Barrett, not yet, but the sharp, cracking bite of a smaller rifle. Concrete near Harris's shoulder splintered, showering dust across his face. He dropped flat, cursing, his breath ragged. "Contact, east," Ramirez barked, already laying fire into the window across the street. The rooftop erupted. Shadows became angles, angles became threats. Muzzle flashes sparked in the distance, orange flares against gray stone. Bullets punched the parapet, chewing stone into grit that stung Elena's cheek. Her rifle snapped to her shoulder, scope narrowing the world into crosshairs. A figure darted across a rooftop, too quick, too precise to be local militia. She fired. The recoil slammed her chest. The figure collapsed, motionless. No hesitation. Her pulse thundered, but her hand stayed steady. Kandahar screamed in the back of her skull, but this time she pushed through. Ramirez shouted over the chaos, "They're flanking, 2 o'clock." Elena swung her scope. Another glint, not glass, muzzle. She fired, stone exploding around the target. He dropped low, vanishing. Harris fired wildly, bursts cracking the air, his panic spilling into the noise. They're everywhere. Control it, Elena snapped, her voice cutting sharp, hard. Short bursts, count your shots. Her own magazine clicked empty. She reloaded fast, hands automatic, training older than her fear. Then it came. The thunder. Deep final. The Barrett spoke again. The rooftop shuddered as the round smashed into the parapet inches from Ramirez's head. He dove flat, swearing, dust and stone spraying his helmet. Elena froze for half a second. The sound clawed her chest, ripped open memory. Kandahar, fire, silence. She forced it back. Her voice cut sharp, Barrett, west roof. Her scope found the glint, distant, patient, waiting. She steadied her breath, slow, steady, no hesitation. But her finger hovered, frozen again on the trigger. Her commander's voice echoed in her head. Raise, take the shot. She blinked. The city blurred. Kandahar's street bled into the present. For a heartbeat, she couldn't tell which rooftop she was looking at, the one in front of her or the one from years ago. Elena, Ramirez's shout ripped her back. The glint shifted. The Barrett was moving. Now or never. She pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed her shoulder. Her shot cracked across the skyline. But the glint didn't vanish. She missed. Her stomach dropped. The Barrett roared back, answering her failure. A round tore through the rooftop near Harris, blasting chunks of stone into his arm. He screamed, clutching it, blood seeping through his sleeve. Elena, Ramirez's voice was fury and fear at once. Do something. Her chest locked tight. The guilt pressed in, not just the miss now, but the old one, the commander's silence echoing across years. Her breath came sharp, ragged. Her hands trembled. But then she looked at Harris, pale, bleeding, his eyes wide. Ramirez dragging him back, firing bursts to cover. They weren't just soldiers, they were hers. Her squad, her responsibility. And she refused to lose them, the way she'd lost her commander. Her jaw set, her lungs steadied. She lined her scope again, heartbeat sinking to the count. Inhale, exhale, patience. Not hesitation, patience. The glint appeared once more, the Barrett shifting just slightly. Now. Her shot cracked, clean, sharp. The glint vanished. Through the scope, she saw the silhouette jerk, collapse. The rifle clattered, sliding down the rooftop. Silence crashed back, heavy, brutal. But it wasn't peace. Because shadows still moved, other rifles still snapped in the distance. The ambush wasn't over. The Barrett was only part of it. Elena, Ramirez shouted, hauling Harris behind cover, we're pinned. Her mind raced. Options flickered and died. Retreat meant running into open ground. Staying meant being chewed apart. Her throat tightened. She heard herself say it before she even realized. We push. Ramirez stared at her like she was mad. Push into what? Into them, she snapped. We break the net or we die in it. His jaw worked, fury burning in his eyes, but he nodded, because choice was an illusion now. Elena moved first, vaulting the low wall, dropping into the adjacent stairwell. Bullets tore through the space she just left, chasing her heels. Ramirez followed, dragging Harris with him, the younger man's teeth clenched against pain. They hit the lower floor, boots pounding, rifles snapping at shadows in broken windows. Elena's blood roared in her ears, but her mind was sharp now, colder than fear. The hesitation was gone. Only survival remained. They cleared a room, then another, muzzle flashes lighting shadows. Enemies fell, some clean, some not. She didn't think. She didn't count. She just moved, pulled, fired, breathed. Her squad followed, raw but alive. When the last shot finally faded, silence dropped heavy again. Bodies lay still in dust. Spent casings glittered faintly in shafts of light. Harris slumped against the wall, clutching his bleeding arm. Ramirez panted, sweat streaking his face. Elena stood in the center of the room, rifle heavy in her hands, chest heaving. The silence pressed again, but this time it carried something else. Not just threat, not just memory. A question. How many more? Because the Barrett they killed wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. And deep in her chest, Elena knew this fight wasn't about rifles or rooftops. It was about ghosts. And ghosts never stopped hunting. How do you measure the cost of silence after the shooting stops? The city was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that offered rest. It was the quiet of absence, of blood cooling in the dust, of shadows stretched across bodies that wouldn't rise again. Elena Reyes stood in the middle of the ruined room, her rifle heavy in her hands. The smell of gunpowder clung to the air, sharp and bitter. Casings glittered faintly in the light cutting through broken walls. Her chest still rose and fell hard, every breath scraped raw by dust and adrenaline. Behind her, Ramirez pressed gauze to Harris's arm, muttering curses under his breath. Harris gritted his teeth, sweat beading his forehead, but his eyes were steady, alive. That was what mattered. Elena should have felt relief, but relief never came, only the weight. She crouched near the body of one of the fallen ambushers, studying him. The gear was too clean, the magazines too full, the weapon too well-maintained. These weren't scavengers, they were trained, supplied, placed here deliberately. Her hand brushed over the rifle at his side. Another serial number scratched away, another ghost weapon. She whispered under her breath, too soft for the others to hear, "Who are you working for?" But the dead never answered. Ramirez's voice broke through the silence, sharp with frustration. "We can't hold here. They'll regroup. We need to move." Elena nodded, but slowly. Her eyes lingered on the horizon through a shattered window. The rooftops looked calm again, empty. But she knew better. Empty wasn't safe. Empty was bait. She turned back to her squad, her voice firm. "We'll move at dusk, too exposed in daylight." Ramirez gave her a hard look like he wanted to argue, but he didn't, not now. The hours crawled. They set up in the ruin, watching, waiting. Harris drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing shallow but steady. Ramirez cleaned his rifle with tight, angry motions. Elena sat apart, her back to the wall, her eyes on the city. But her mind wasn't on the city. It was on Kandahar. She saw it again, sharper now than ever. The convoy burning, her commander's voice cutting out mid-sentence, the glint of glass, the thunder, her finger frozen on the trigger. And the silence afterward. That silence had followed her into every city since, into every mission, onto every rooftop. She had buried it deep, told herself it was past, told herself she could lead without it breaking her. But tonight, with the Barrett echoing through her chest again, she couldn't lie to herself anymore. She had frozen then, and part of her had frozen ever since. "Elena!" Her head snapped up. Ramirez was watching her, his eyes hard, searching. "You saw this coming," he said quietly, not accusing, just stating. "The Barrett, the ambush, you weren't surprised." She didn't answer. "You've been here before," he pressed, "haven't you?" Her throat tightened. Words burned, but she forced them out. "Kandahar, years ago, another Barrett, another rooftop, I froze, and I lost people." The silence after was heavier than gunfire. Ramirez's jaw clenched. He looked away, exhaling through his teeth, but he didn't speak. Elena waited for anger, for blame, for him to say what she had told herself for years, that hesitation had killed them. But instead his voice came low, and now. Her eyes dropped to her rifle. Her hands still trembled, faint but real. She swallowed hard. "Now I fight not to freeze again." The admission hung between them, raw, unguarded. Ramirez nodded once, not forgiveness, not condemnation, just understanding. They didn't speak of it again. When dusk came, they moved. Harris leaned on Ramirez, pale but stubborn. Elena took point, eyes sharp, every corner another potential ghost. The city stretched out ahead, endless in ruin, endless in silence. And somewhere in that silence more rifles waited. She knew it, she could feel it. But something had shifted inside her. The guilt was still there, heavy as ever, but it wasn't chains anymore. It was fuel. Every heartbeat, every breath, every trigger pull was her defiance, against the ghosts, against the silence, against herself. They reached the edge of the district as night fell, slipping into alleys lit only by faint moonlight. The streets stretched wide beyond, open and dangerous. Elena crouched at the corner, scanning the rooftops. Nothing. But she whispered anyway. Where did you get that Barrett? The question wasn't for the enemies she'd killed. It wasn't even for the ones still hunting. It was for the unseen hands that fed them, the shadows that kept arming ghosts. The question would follow her, she knew, just like Kandahar. She rose slowly, signaling her squad forward. They moved together, shadows among shadows, carrying their wounds and their silence into the night. And as they disappeared into the ruins, Elena felt the truth settle heavy but clear. Some ghosts never left you, some battles never ended, some questions never found answers. But still you moved. Not because you were unbroken, but because people behind you needed you to keep going. And maybe that was the closest thing to redemption anyone ever got. The silence swallowed the city again, vast and endless. And Elena Reyes walked on, carrying her ghosts, carrying her guilt, carrying her dignity in the only way she knew how. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.